Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So Sad Sangat Ji, were very blessed, and I feel personally very honoured to be joined by Navkiran Kaur, the daughter of Shaheed Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra, and Gurmeet Kaur, who is an activist and a Sevadaar for People.org, who has actually created a book recently on Bhai Jaswant Singh Ji's life and their legacy. And we're going to look into that book ourselves today. So I'd like to introduce Navkiran Kaur and Gurmeet Kaur.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
And we should have Gurmeet Kaur with us too. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So just on behalf of Basics of Sikhi and the Everything's 13 team, I'd like to just offer a massive thanks for joining us today and giving us your time and the Sangat your time in what should be a really exciting and information-filled conversation that should hopefully inspire us all as it did the book itself with me. So I'd just like to start with a few introductions, if that's okay. So Navkiran Kaur, would you like to go first? And then we'll follow with Gurmeet Kaur and then myself, if that's all right.
Sure. I'm, as you know, I'm Navkiran Kaur Khalra. I'm daughter of Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra, and I would say कि जो काम मेरे पापा ने शुरू किया सी, the work he started in his speech, he mentioned that Sikhi has a lot of things to be done, and the Panth has a lot of projects that we need to work on for the Panth. And out of all those things, there's one thing, one topic that's the human rights topic. And out of that human rights, there's one issue that I want to take up. That's about the Lavar Slasha, about the Sikh Katleam, the massacre, Jere Chute Mukable. And that's what I am fighting for. And that's what he came to diaspora to talk about. And I would say after his abduction, it fell on his family to carry on the legacy, and we are still committed as a family that's the project, that's the seva that Waheguru gave to our family, and that's the one that we are continuing. And it's not that there are not other things to be done in the Panth, but Waheguru has given us this seva, and then we are committed to carry on to this seva until we live on.
That's great, and thank you very much for that, Benji. Yeah, something that you said very much resonates with myself, that we've all got our own parts to play, and definitely for yourself and Bhai Sahib and your family, especially Mataji as well. There's a very special seva, very powerful one to do. And am I right in saying, Benji, that you're continuing the work under the Khalra Mission Organisation?
Hanji.
Great. I think we'll learn a little bit more about that later on. So thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to pass on to Gurmeet Kaur, who's going to give a short introduction about herself and the seva that she's involved with.
Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Mera naam Gurmeet Kaur hai. People know me as Baataan Wali Gurmeet Kaur because I've documented fascinating folk tales of Punjab. Thousands of years old are folk tales of Punjab in dual languages for the last 9 years. That's what I've been doing. I believe that our language, Punjabi Ma Boli, our heritage, which is basically our legacy of our heroes, our history, is an inherent right of our children to be passed on and to learn. So I'm working for children. So you can call me a children's activist. So our Navi Paniri, our new generation, is well informed, is empowered with our language, and informed with our history and heritage sites as well. So my background is technology. Basically, I was an engineer and scientist, computer scientist, and I worked in telecommunication industry. And I quit my job to follow my soulful passion, which is what I'm doing right now. And I had the honor of finding this organization called People. It's the name of the native tree of Punjab, where a lot of activities happen in a village. A lot of knowledge is transferred, and everybody comes together, shares their sorrows and joys. But it is also an acronym for partnership in promoting Punjabi art and literature. So under this non-profit organization, we are creating this beautiful art and literature that children can relate to, learn from, and feel pride in their language and their legacy. But also we are taking these books, any proceeds from these books, we are taking them back to Punjab so that we can connect children in Punjab as well to their legacy, because we don't see great children's literature coming out of Punjab as well. So that is my mission. In the last 9 years, we've reached out to thousands of schools in Punjab, distributed our books there. And with Jaswant Singh Khalra book as well, we are planning to, my dream is for every child in Punjab is to have this book one day.
Yeah, it's an amazing dream, and I think a very powerful dream as well. So thank you, Gurmeet Kaur, for sharing a little bit about yourselves, which we'll delve into in a short while. So just a quick introduction. My name is Mandeep Singh. I'm a Sevadaar for Basics of Sikhi. I'm a maths teacher by profession, and I started Seva with Basics of Sikhi after the enrollment in the Pracharak course, the Vidyala, that took place a couple of years ago. And as a result of that, been blessed with doing talks, discussions, and other interfaith events. So I'd just like to go on to first the Navkiran Kaur, if that's okay, Benji. And in particular, so before we do that, sorry, I just want to give the Sangat a brief overview of Jaswant Singh Khalra and my understanding of what Bhai Sahib's legacy was, and a bit of an introduction. And then we'll pass on to Navkiran Kaur to learn more about what it might have been living with Bhai Sahib, and even growing up with having Bhai Sahib as a father figure, which would have been very, very powerful. So as many of us would have heard, and for those of you just tuning in to learn about Bhai Sahib for the first time, Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra was a human rights activist whose work was mainly based on the injustices that took place from the scale of pre-1984 and post-1984, and the Sikh genocide that took place at hands of the Indian state government at that point. Bhai Sahib was vital and one of the main factors that led to the uncoverings of the executions and also murders and also abductions of many Sikhs that had nothing to do with the armed struggle at that point, and that were being harassed by the Punjab police and the Punjab government at that point. And they did this through going around to police stations, doing on the grassroots work with families of those affected, and actually accounting and documenting all of the evidence that was required. But unfortunately, that fell upon deaf ears. So then Bhai Sahib took his voice to the courts, which also fell upon deaf ears. And then in 1995 and years before that, actually traveled to the diaspora to spread the evidence they'd collated, and also this mystery that had finally been solved as to what was happening to all these disappearances within Punjab. And because of their work, we're eternally grateful. The Pant in itself is eternally grateful for the things they uncovered at those vital times in history that could have very, very easily been forgotten within an instant. And it was vital that Bhai Sahib took a stance and took action at that point, because time was of the essence. So that was just a very quick summary, and we'll talk more about Bhai Sahib's life. But first, I'd like to go to Navkiran Kaur and ask what it was like growing up with Bhai Sahib, what this Subha was like, any fond memories that you'd like to share with the Sangat, because I think it's always important to think about the context of a person as in addition to what they did. So even the build-up, if you like, in that sense.
When he was abducted in 1995, so I was 10 years of age. So you can just imagine how much memories I will have. I do have some childhood memories, and I feel we were pretty much a normal family. There wasn't anything specific. No person in Sikhi knows that they would eventually be a Shaheed or not. So his lifestyle, he was definitely an activist. He was an activist from his teenage. He had a lot of inspiration from his grandfather's life, and even before his grandfather, great grandfathers. One of the person, Sura Singh, he was martyred in Wapind after martyrdom of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur. So there was a legacy which inspired him that he has to stand out when something is wrong. He has to be there to stand out and speak up against the injustice. So growing up, I would say a few things. We were treated as children, but still he would also make sure that us being still less than 10 years, in 91, 92, 5, 6 years old, he would take us and even mummy. We would all go to conferences which were related to human rights or other issues. So he didn't shy away that, oh, these are little children and I shouldn't be taking them to such situations. And I do remember him working with some of the international human rights groups. Ramnaran Kumar was trying to document in Punjab in 94, 95. And I remember traveling with him to Darbar Sahib for shooting a documentary, and then even to some families. So in that way, he would involve even us and introduce us to those people that they're doing something significantly important. I was just today, actually, I was asking my brother and my mom about like what should be the memory that I should talk about, and we were just laughing about it, as you said, some personal memories. So my father moved to England in 1990. And the intention was because of the situation in Punjab, the family, his parents, my grandparents, and siblings were worried that it's not safe for him to be in Punjab. So he, under the family pressure, he moved to England. But after going there, he was not satisfied either with the activism that he could do in England for Punjab. He thought that whatever he could contribute, he has to be there in the field to contribute. And second thing, he, for some reason, felt that this is not the right environment for my children to grow up in England. So that's something when he came back, he's like, I don't want my children to grow up in that environment, and I want them to be raised here in Punjab. So that's why he came back in 92. He had actually gotten the political asylum and all the paperwork, and we were almost going to move to England around that time. We were just remembering the day he came. The next day, my mom came from work, and we all three, my father and my brother and myself, we were using my school bag as a harmonium, baja. We didn't have the baja at home, and he was just, we all three were singing Tan Tan Baba Nanak Jeda Vichhadya Nu Milda. So we were like just remembering that. So those kind of things, we used to have fun moments. We used to sing, we used to travel. After coming back from England, he did feel that he had not given us much time. So we went for a summer vacation in Dalhousie. It's a hill station in India. So those are few memories that we have of him. But I think by the time he came back from England, he was pretty determined. Vaheguru had shown him the path, like this is the thing, these are the things you need to work, because within England, he picked up like what kind of people are involved in the struggle. There are always good people, right people. Some people are good, but they don't have a vision. And that's, I think, more dangerous for the Panth if you don't have a vision, but you're good, because you don't know what to do. And you can follow anyone who can just mislead you anywhere. So, so when he came back, he actually figured out that with all the propaganda that Indian government was doing against the Sikhs, he luckily, or Vaheguru's made, he got that cremation grounds record to start, and he knew that this would change the whole narrative of the Sikh struggle. The way we had been branded as a separatist, as terrorist, this would show the world that the story is actually the opposite. And in the house, he was preparing himself, especially after his visit to Canada. He prepared my mom. He prepared kind of like, we were still young, but the things he said to my mom, my Dadaji, was clear that he knew that something can happen, and they all should be prepared for it.
That's great. Thank you very much for that insight, a very personal insight, but I think something that inspired myself and will inspire a lot of the Sangat. Just a few things I wanted to discuss, and Gurmeet Kaur, to yourself as well. One thing that was really important to hear was that Bhai Sahib would take not only Mataji, Bibi Paramjit Kaur, but yourself, Navkiran, your brother, to these conferences. And Gurmeet Kaur, I know you've done quite a lot of work with young children in terms of activism, and also bringing them into Sikhi and also connecting to them to their Punjabi culture. How important is it to expose children to the truths of the world and also the truths of the Panth in terms of what we are facing, as Navkiran Kaur was from a very young age? Because I think a lot of parents do shy away from that. and keep their seva to themselves to a certain extent. But as we can see, it's definitely had a long-lasting and a very powerful, important, and positive effect on Navkiran Kaur. So I just wanted to see, Gurmeet, if you'd experienced anything like that, the negatives and the positives of exposing our young generations to the realities of the problems we're facing and presenting them with solutions and introducing them to solutions of how to overcome these things. You're muted, Benji. There we go.
I absolutely believe that we must expose our children to the realities of life as early as possible in the way that they can understand and process. Teaching them history roots them. It gives them a sense of identity. There's a saying I use often, you don't know where you're going until you know where you're coming from. So if our children don't know their background, the struggles of the ancestors, of their parents, they are not going to be rooted into their own identities, and therefore they won't be able to face the world. If they don't understand themselves, they won't have the capability to understand the world. So I think it's absolutely important, and that's why I do what I do, is teach our children. I'm amazed that 36 years after 1984, there has not been one single book written about 1984 for our children. We've shied away from telling the truth to our next generation, and the result of which is that my generation doesn't know what happened in 1984, didn't know what happened in the post-1984 disappearances and so on and so forth. They think all of this is made up, manufactured, and therefore I took the initiative of bringing this book, whereby I don't only tell the story of Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra, by giving our children a hero to be inspired by, but also give them the background of what caused him to be that activist that he was, what happened in the background in Punjab. So this book is not only his story, his biography, but it is the story of 20th century Punjab. So through his eyes, through his lens and prism, we're showing them what happened in Punjab from early 1900s, from the time of his grandfather, who was a revolutionary freedom fighter for the Indian independence. We get to tell the children the story of the contribution of the Sikhs in Indian independence. We tell them the story of 1947, the partition, and what Punjab had to forego. And then we tell them the story of the 1966 reorganization of Punjab, when Punjab was truncated again, because Jaswant Singh Khalra was in the middle of all of that. His family was in the middle of that. So it's through the story of this family, we are telling the story of Punjab. And then we tell the story of Anandpur Sahib resolution, which is very important for children to understand if they want to understand what rights were taken away from Punjab, and what was the whole Sikh struggle and the Dharam Yudh Morcha about, and what were the events that led up to the 1984 events, June 1984, and then the November 1984 pogroms, and then the disappearances. And so through Jaswant Singh Khalra, through this family, I get to tell the story of the Punjab. And this is not only Jaswant Singh Khalra's story, or Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra's story. This is the story of all those sons and daughters of Punjab, those who were disappeared, those who were denied the right to live, and those who were denied the right to die in dignity, and their last rights as well. There are mothers who are still waiting for their children to come back because they weren't handed the death certificate, and they don't know what happened to their children. So it is the story of the disappeared sons and daughters of Punjab. It is the story of the 20th century Punjab. And I believe our children should know that. If they don't know the 20th century, how will they shape the 21st century?
Yeah, I think definitely key points. And I think quite often, maybe it's the newer generations are trying to bubble wrap our children. But I remember going to a Gurdwara and seeing, this man with his hand in his head, Baba Deep Singh Ji Shaheed, and thinking, whoa, this is crazy. And rather than it scaring me, it actually left me feeling quite inquisitive as to what's the reason behind this? Where do I fit into all this? Seeing Bhai Mani Singh Ji being about to be chopped limb by limb. I think those things are really important, whether it's through the medium of a Gurdwara or even attending rallies and getting involved politically with activism. These things are very, very important. I think as a new generation, it's something that we need to keep exposing our children to, so that they also find the onerous upon themselves and it's not someone else's job. And that was something that really came through when reading this book about Bhai Sahib, that they thought, I can sit here and say there's so many things happening, or I can get up and actually do something. And I think quite often when we make those first steps, as Benji has mentioned herself, Guru Sahib lays out the path quite simply for us, and any obstacle that comes in the way as well is also overturned. And just on your mention, Benji, I'd like to introduce the Sangat to the book at some points as well. And you mentioned all those mothers that are still waiting for their children to come. And this is probably one of the most, the illustration that hit me most. So if anyone hasn't got a copy of the book, we'll talk about the book and where it can be purchased later on. But I do want to reference a few of the illustrations because they are really evocative and very, very emotional, actually. And they've been done by a fantastic job by Mandeep Singh from Inquisitive. And this one, I believe, is the mothers of Block 32 from Trilopuri, which, you know, you can see the children lying on the floor on their own, and the mothers congregate together, feeling that same pain of separation and also anxiety because they don't know what's happened. And I think that's sometimes worse than knowing a bad deed has happened and waiting for that news to arrive. So thank you for that, Benji. I'd just like to go now in terms of to both of you, actually, in terms of how this book came about and where the idea came from. Was it a collective thing? So yeah, where did this book spring from?
Navkiran, you want to go first?
I think you should start. You are the one who actually picked up the topic.
So. Like I said, I'd been always wanting to tell the story of 1984 to children. I myself am a 1984 survivor, and at some point I thought of writing my story, and hopefully that would be in the future as well. But what happened is, my series is fascinating Folktales of Punjab, and by which I'm connecting children to Thet Punjabi and through to flora and fauna and culture of Punjab, and whatever is important to us, our kadra keemta, our values, how our ancestors lived and how our ancestors thought, and what was their way of life like. But then I'd been thinking for a long time is of starting a series called Fascinating Heroes of Punjab, through which we can connect our children to not only the heroes of the West that they learn from, but our own heroes in beautiful books, beautiful illustrated books in both the languages. And so that thought was going on in my head, and I was working on a concept of one of the stories, and this project came and just fell into my lap by Guru Sahib's Kirpa, because Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra's 25th anniversary of disappearance was this September through October of 2020. And last year, a friend of mine, 1.5 years ago, a friend of mine said, we need to work on a book on Jaswant Singh Khalra, or actually like an article on Jaswant Singh Khalra. And I said, well, an article doesn't do justice to him. And we talked about the book. And even though I was totally involved in the other project, since the anniversary was coming, I said, you know what, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing. And I took this project and I called Navkiran, and we just started working on it, and interviewed the family, interviewed her, collected all the documentation that already collected, and the story was playing in my head. And I was at that time also lobbying for saving Baba Guru Nanak Sahib's fields in Kartarpur. So I had already scheduled all these travels to Pakistan and universities in Pakistan, where I was speaking about Kartarpur and Baba Nanak on his 550th birth anniversary. So while I was sitting in the plane, while I had free time, I was just drawing out the story of Jaswant Singh Khalra's life. So that's how the project came about, and I guess it got full. It completed just a couple months ago, and we got even due to COVID, everything was delayed. Every single thing was delayed, and I was panicking. And Navkiran kept telling me, Benji, it's different. It's a different time. Calm down. Nothing is going to happen. Jaswant Singh Khalra is timeless. Even if you don't get the book out on the anniversary, we can get the book out later. But I was like determined to get it out on the anniversary, and we did it. I mean, we had so many obstructions from getting the illustrations on time to getting the printing on time to getting the logistical shipping logistics and everything. But everything fell in place, and with Guru Sahib, the books came out beautiful.
They did. They really did. And I think you raised a really interesting point there, that sometimes obstacles come in the way. And there's a famous saying about Shaheeds that, Shaheeds within our Itihas live on forever. And such is the legacy of Bhai Sahib, most definitely. So just going back to a point you raised, Benji, regarding if students or if children don't know where they've come from, how does that affect their direction going future in their life? And what you said, I've just been thinking about it in my mind for a second. And that was very much the same process that occurred for me. So growing up, it was a very standard Punjabi family. Me, Charab, Jo Kehlo, just, Aam Punjabis, just living a good life, right? And then from a young age, mum always made me read Japji Sahib. And I think this is another really important point, that how powerful, and you do very, very well to illustrate this within the book, how powerful women are behind every story, mine included. And then a point came where, for one reason or another, I ended up going to, or trying out actually, a Sikh school, a Sikh Ether school in Birmingham. And it was there I was actually exposed to 1984. And the fact that this stuff happened 30 years ago, and it's not the picture of Mandeep Singh Ji, which may have been hard to connect to 300 years ago. There were pictures of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, there were pictures of Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra. And the fact that the miracles that took place 300 years ago are still happening now, and blood is still being spilt so that we can be living, breathing, and enjoying our lives today. I think that really gave me a sense of direction. Also inspired me to look further into the past. So yeah, I think the point you raised is really, really important. And in particular, making it accessible to younger children, which is a balance this book creates in a very, very beautiful way, that it's available to all audiences. Myself, I learned so much from it. And just like to spend a minute or so just going through the contents of the books. I think a lot of the Sangat are interested to see what's actually in it. So as Benji mentioned, it's very chronological in its order. It starts about Bhai Sahib's upbringing, and then we have a timeline of events that span through the history of Punjab. And I've read a few books on 1984, and there was some information here that I had not heard of, news articles that had been sourced that I had sourced for the first time. So it really is a khajana, if you like, a treasure chest of sources and facts. So a great collection to anyone's library in terms of just understanding the Galukara of 1984 in its entirety as well. So just going to Navkiran Kaur, Benji, what were your thoughts when you first had a copy of the book and had a chance to read it? What was going through your mind? I think that'd be really nice to hear, and also interesting to hear from yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think, I was involved with the book with Gurmeet Kaur, reading the drafts and giving her feedback. So I had read it a couple of times, but having the book physically in your hand gives you the sense of completion, and like that you have finished and achieved something, that the project is finally in the hands. I think it was you can say, I wouldn't say it's the last thing to happen in the legacy of any Shaheed, but this was the first step. And one thing that I really liked, and sometimes you don't notice those points when you're doing or working on something, some project, is later on you realize that I really admire now the fact that the first book that came on Jaswant Singh Khalra is actually targeted to the audience, which is youth, which is the children. Because it's not that the books on 1984 have not been written. There are a lot of good books that have been written, but the target audience is always grown-up people who can understand the philosophy, who can understand in depth. But there's nothing to connect the youth from total ignorance to that point. So only few people who actually have that drive to go and search and understand 1984 would go look into those books. So this book, I would still say, is an introduction to the Punjab struggle, but this was really important. And the illustrations, if you go through each illustration tells its own story. So you need to see the minutest details that Aman has put into, and Penji has guided him on what each thing, each item placed in that illustration should signify. So anybody going through the story should also look into all the objects within the illustrations, that they are speaking something, they're telling some other story also in it. So having this overall, I would say this was the first initiative, and I feel really good to be associated with it. And this is not just a story of Jaswant Singh Khalra, this is a story of Punjab, and the Punjab he was living in. So I feel like we were discussing recently about this, that all of us who are trying to do some kind of a seva of Sikhi, we are not that capable to analyze or to analyze a Shaheed's personality. We cannot find those things. We cannot define that, oh, this is the reason he became a Shaheed. No, this is all because of Guru Sahib's kirpa. We all have power, support system around us. We all struggle through our lives. We all have a connection with Sikhi. We all go through that. They were also going through the same phase of life. But there's something different that Guru Sahib picked them and gave them this opportunity of Shahadat. So I think we cannot analyze Shaheeds, but we can at least walk around the journey that they had gone through and try to see that what were the few things that helped them distinguish themselves from other people, and what could be few reasons for which Vaheguru gave that bakshish to them, that daat to them, that they could be the shaheeds of the Qawm. So this is a daat. So I think that's something good about this book, that this is the story of Punjab, but the Punjab in which Jaswant Singh Khalra was living in.
That's great.
Like
Yes,
to
Benji.
use a point here, and that both of you brought, that since it's a children's book, we didn't want the words to be that heavy. So we brought in illustrations, we brought in maps, we commissioned maps for this book. We brought in newspaper cuttings from that time to authenticate the facts. We brought in family pictures and historical pictures from Punjab, and we put it all together to create sort of an introductory museum, or like it's not like when they're reading this book, it's not they are drowned in the weight of the words, but they are they are exploring, and they are intrigued, and they're inspired, and they will go up, and they go up to internet or other books and research more details. And that was the whole objective, is to inspire political activism from our children, via these books. So when they see these books, when they see, they can pick up a topic and say, okay, let's talk about disappearances. There are pointers as to which organizations are working on disappearances right now. So they can go and volunteer with those organizations. They can talk about 1984, and there are references to the more in-depth documentation on 1984. They can pick up another book and read about 1984. They can pick up a topic and say, I want to research more into this topic. So this book is not only a history book or a biography, it's a guide to political activism for our youth.
Yeah, and just going off what you're saying, I actually experienced that myself while I was reading the book. I was like, there's an offshoot there, and there's another offshoot there, looking at what Ellen South were doing, and then looking at what people were doing, and all these other great organizations that are still at work today. And I think for me, the book, as well as conveying the life of Bhai Sahib amazingly, and also the order of events in Punjab, it acts as a platform that allows the reader to actually delve into whichever speciality in the book, if you like, in a bit more. And I think that's a really, really powerful and very hard thing to do, actually, rather than to keep the reader focused on the book, which it does very, very well, but also opens them up to all of these other avenues which they can actually pursue whatever in a personal way. And I think another point you mentioned is the book is very, very accessible. I think academics get very excited, and sometimes they get too excited that no one understands what they're saying. As with many books, whether it's especially philosophy, I've been reading philosophy recently. I'm like, so you can't get the words across. And I think even our own academics, whether it's just sect habit or nature, but quite often the best messages are the simplest ones. And I think the book encapsulates that in a very, very powerful way. And one, let's only go back to one thing Navkiran Kaur Benji mentioned in terms of the illustrations. And one thing I love what you said, Benji, was that each illustration has its own story within this whole book. And I just came to one of the stories that I interpreted from one of the illustrations, which was this one here. So in that you can see Bhai Sahibji's Bapuji, their father, holding a picture of Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra, and many parents also holding children, their children's photos. And then the description sums up what this photo was about, actually. And that is the simple fact, the loving fact of parents being scared for their children. And this detail really resonated with me, that before Bhai Sahib gave their Shaheedi, that they actually went to go and meet Mataji and Bapuji. And one of their final speeches was that I think Bapu Kartar Singh Ji was saying that, why are you bringing this upon yourself and also your family? Why are you taking this burden on? And at that point, Bhai Sahib Ji showed their determination with their reply by saying that this is my seva, and if no one else will do it, who will? And at this point, Guru Sahib has blessed me with this opportunity. And then even just reflecting on that, Bapuji, when interviewed later, said that my son followed the path of truth and bold opposition to injustice. I have faith that there will be a new phase of struggle to realize the ideals of freedom which our leaders have betrayed. And Jaswant Singh Khalra's actually role in not only the seva he did, but the seva that continues today through the inspiration that it gives. So that really grounded me into thinking that, as you said, Benji, he was a man like everyone else that had struggles, whose parents were worried for him, but arose amongst all that, which is nearly an impossible task, but did very well. And just lastly, sorry, before I hand back to you guys, is you mentioned how it's very hard. There aren't qualities or traits that you can assign to this is a Shaheed, because they're also individual. And when Guru Sahib's Kirpa is reigning above someone, there's no way of explaining that. But one thing I did see from Bhai Sahib Ji is the openness to embrace what was happening. And with many of the Shaheeds as well, we see that same quality throughout all of them. And I think it could have been quite easy for Bhai Sahib to think, I have the skill set to be able to do this seva, but I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and let someone else deal with it. And we see that with all the other Shaheed Singhs or Singhniya, that they acknowledge the guna that Guru Sahib had given them, but then acknowledging it is one thing, practically using it and applying it somewhere is a whole different mind game. And that was just one quality I see within all the Shaheeds, including Bhai Sahib as well. Yeah, I mean, any other comments or points from either of you at this point?
So yeah, combining the 2 points that you just spoke about is one, taking the initiative, and then the illustrations. This is also one of my favorite illustrations, is Bibi Paramjeet Kaur. After Bhai Sahib Shaheedi, she didn't say that our family did their dues, and let somebody else take the torch and walk with it. She took the torch upon herself. She took the initiative upon herself, not only to get justice on Bhai Sahib's or for Bhai Sahib's murder, but also the 3,000 unidentified bodies that he had identified in just one district out of 13 districts in Punjab. So she worked for justice for those families as well. And I think we all need to identify our seva and say, this is what I'm going to do. This is what the Panth is calling for. And that's how, not look at the leaders. If you ask today, if you see today what's happening in Punjab or what's happening with the Panth, everybody's saying, oh, our leaders suck. They don't do anything. They blame it on the SGPC or their leadership, or blame it on infiltration of the RSS or the government of India or whatever. But what are we doing is what we need to look at. So.
Hanji, and I think one thing coming into Sikhi, one thing that was very, very clear to me is that we have the same power source, if you like, as all of the people in our history. Gurbani is still here, Itihas is still here. Even more so, we've got it 10 times easier in a way, because there isn't 80 rupees on the price of my head, or I don't have a Wazir Khan coming after me, or even a Beanta or KP Gil coming after me at this point. So in that sense, it's on a plate for us. And I think our generation, quite often people see these things as chores. And this is teaching a Gurmat class at my local Gurdwara. Quite often the kids are like, so a kid asked me this morning saying, we're doing Santya of Japji Sahib. He's like, so why is it so long? And I was like, what are you talking about, the Pauri or just general Santya? And he's like, Santya, why is it taking me so long? And then I asked him, I said, how long did it take you to learn English? And he's like, oh, 4 or 5 years. And I said, you could read a paragraph of English when you were maybe 6, 7. He's like, yeah. I go, how long have you been doing your Santya for? He said, a year. And I go, can you read a line of Gurbani? He's like, yep. And I go, well, why don't we start viewing things with the same scope? And then he's like, oh, you know what? I'm actually doing pretty good here. So it's really important. And I think what you said in terms of taking the onus upon ourselves, a question that we always ask the children with the seva we're involved in is, what seva are you going to do when you're older? Rather than what do you want to be when you're older? I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. That's great. But if we start instilling those seeds now, they realize that, oh, I've got a part to play in this. And at some point, I'm going to need to take control. And I think what you said, Benji, encapsulates our problem now is that we try to outsource our problems because it's the easy option. But then at the same time, not seeing seva as a chore, but also an opportunity. Because if we don't take it when it's presented, Guru Sahib, I'm sure, has got millions of people lining up to take it. So let's grab it with both hands, as Bhai Sahib did when the opportunity came. Navkiran Kaur, Benji, anything you want to share with the Sangat or anything on the comments that have been made so far?
Yeah, I think, nothing different what you both have said, but I feel like every person in life, if you really want to do some kind of a something, seva that has a long lasting impact, just focus on one thing, because I've been in US for more than 10 years now, and I've seen sometimes people getting disoriented, or they are disillusioned about, like, they were so passionate about Sikhi, especially the kids growing up here, and later on within 4 to 5 years they're like, oh, it's not as I was trying to do the seva, and it's not. I mean, they come up with excuses that, oh, this organization is not helping me go forward or something like that. But I feel like Sikhi is not a project. Sikhi is not something you invest for 4 years and then it will start giving you return. Sikhi is a lifelong commitment, and Sikhi is not just what we talk about. Sikhi is to live. Your lifestyle needs to be shown in a way that our gurus have exemplified by living it. And I feel like the sahaj and the sabr, the santokh, that's something that is really important in our lifestyle, especially given how the Western culture influences us in all ways. I work in a engineering company, a total corporate system, a capitalist, and I see clashes with my principles of living versus the capitalist countries that we are living in. So there are problems, but then you need to figure out the way to navigate through it, that it totally doesn't washes you away. And this was one of the reason my father also went back to Punjab, because he also found these clashes of principles. And I think for anyone to be an activist, I think you should follow just the guru. People and I personally feel that sometimes being an activist, you do have to have emotions for the cause, for the panth, but being emotionally attached just to people will not serve your cause. So the mission is more important than the people. Yes, people are important. Sangat is important, but people can make mistake. So don't sit on it and don't regret your whole thing that you started a seva and then these people betrayed, and so I'm just ending up the seva. That's not what you committed for. You committed to your guru for the seva, and just focus on that. Don't focus on people around you. Yes, until they are there with you, that's great. That's why gurus made that the sangat is with you. But if somebody is not capable to do seva, don't blame them. It's just that they are not capable of doing it. So that happened to my father also. After his abduction also, there were a lot of betrayals in our Jaswant Singh Khalra case. People who were supposedly his friends actually sided the police, and they tried to totally derail the case. So things happen, but the thing is, my mother and my grandfather, they were so focused that, okay, my son, my grandfather knew that Jaswant Singh, whatever he did was not just for his family or nothing to do with just himself. It's for the Panth. So we need to make sure that we keep moving on what work he started and take it to the next level.
Definitely.
So that's something I take in from my father's own story, that I have a lot of people in my life with whom I'm working, but I don't want to judge them if later on they say we cannot no longer move on on this path. It's okay. It's all Vaiguru's way of doing things. Everyone has the amount of seva they can do. That's already decided by Vaiguru.
Andy, definitely. And just going on what you said, Benji, quite a few things actually I've noted down. The first one is, took me back to a conversation I had with Harinder Singh from Sikri, which is on your side of the pond, which I attended 2 or 3 years ago. And he said something very, very important to me. It stuck with me, I think it was stuck with me for the rest of my life. And he said, Mandeep Singh, a lot of people are driven in Sikhi emotionally, but very few are driven mentally. And that really struck with me. I think that sums up the reactionary phase that we're going through as a Panth. Where something happens, we go crazy. There's no vision, as Gurmeet Kaur said, and then people get disheartened because they've invested their emotion and their efforts into something when there wasn't any structure in the first place. And as a result now, they think the next time a Panthik Masala comes around, I'm not going to get involved because of the bad history of the previous ones. So having vision and also staying grounded, not just emotionally, emotion helps with definitely within Sikhi, but also mentally viewing things in a mental way, I think is really, really important. Just finishing off. Yes, Benji.
Sorry. So it's very unique. What his seva was he identified it very clearly that a lot of people protest, a lot of people make a racket that, injustices are happening. They go and demonstrate in front of embassies and so on. But he identified his seva and goals clearly, and that was to document it, to provide evidence. And he focused on that one thing as to provide the evidence and expose it to the world. And he did that very clearly. And so the book, like I said, it's a political activism guide. At every step, what Jaswant Singh Khalra was doing, the book delves into his ideology. What was his thinking behind that? So children are guided towards taking an initiative and following it through and doing something concrete with it.
Yeah, and just come back to you in a second, Gurmeet Kaur, because you yourself have also, I guess, chosen a path and given your life to it, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on, because it's not an easy thing to do, especially within diaspora where we've got all these other things going on in our lives. But one thing that came to mind in terms of being serious about your seva was, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the speeches that Bhai Sahib ji gave, I think it was in England, when appealing to the diaspora and saying that quite often, sometimes people are saying 200,000 people have been Shaheed. Sometimes some people are saying 2 million. It gives us nothing to stand on when we're just shouting out random numbers. And, his seva encapsulated that if we want to be serious, we have to come up with serious seva. In this case, it was getting the hard evidence, getting the documents. And that goes back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, Benji, in terms of what the contents of the book were. And that is having things based with facts. And even for children, so that when they go out and have discussions with these things, quite often I've seen at my Sikh society, my school, kids saying 1984 Sikhs were attacked. And then someone reputes the point with an India article, and they're like, oh, I haven't got anything to say, because it's all emotional. And I think if we really want to be serious about the extent of the seva we do, we need to arm ourselves with the facts and figures, which is very, very important. And I think just to thank you for putting that in, so that the children are also aware that a narrative should be filled with facts and figures. It should be a habit. It shouldn't be something that happens every now and again. That should be the core foundation, as Bhai Sahib did. And so just going on to you, Gurmeet Kaur Benji, before we start to wrap up, I just wanted to ask, you yourself has chosen a path, and also yourself, Navkiran Kaur, but in particular, Gurmeet Kaur, what was it like transitioning from working in technology and software, I believe, and then thinking, right, I'm now going to give this up? Was it a long-term vision? Was there a point which kind of tilted you over to the other side? What was that process like? And what advice would you give to anyone that wants to also give their life in seva in a similar way?
When I started writing for children is when my daughter was born. She's going to be 10 years soon, 10 years old. I started documenting folk tales of Punjab because I found that in her library, in her nursery, there was not one beautiful Punjabi book. Because of books we brought from Punjab, my son, who's older than her, didn't want to read that. So children over here, they can't connect themselves to the literature from Punjab because it's not illustrated very well. The language is difficult to understand. They're not dual language, so on and so forth. So I'm looking at this 100 million Punjabis worldwide, and Punjabi being the 10th largest language or most popular language, 10th most popular language, and no beautiful books. And it points to a bankruptcy of our state. And I believe that if we don't attach our children with Boli, how can we teach them Bani? And sorry, we're speaking in English right now. I feel odd, but because most of the times I'm trying to speak in Punjabi. So that I thought that was my seva. If nobody's done it, then not just wait for somebody else to do it. That was the seva I took. And once I created these 3 books, I was still working on the first 3 books, but then I saw the response was tremendous, and parents were like hungry for more and more. And it became difficult for me to balance 3 things. You know, being a mother is a full-time job, and being a technologist was a full-time job, and then doing this was a full-time job in itself. So and where would the funding come from? You know, so I had to do all the work myself, creating the books, authoring them, finding the content, researching the content, publishing the books, and distributing the books. So something had to go. And I started getting actually really sick at that point because my back started crashing a lot. And I went to a doctor, and I mean, a lot of doctors said, oh, you know, you're degenerating and nothing can happen. But one doctor, he analyzed my life and he said, something has got to go in your life. These are the 3 things you're focusing on. They're too much. What has got to go? And it was easy for me. And I said, my job's got to go.
Yeah, definitely.
So now I have 2 full-time jobs.
Brilliant. I think encapsulating what we said earlier, Keiwari, you just start by doing whatever you can for the Pant, and Maharaj Ape put something in your lap, and it seems as if they have with you as well, which is a blessing, a massive blessing in itself. Just before we start wrapping up, we've got a few questions from the Sangat, which I'd like to share with you both and ask you both, actually. So first, Navkiran Kaur, for yourself, there's a question saying, who actually inspired, I know we've mentioned it before, but if you could go into a little bit more detail, either of you, who actually inspired Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra? Who were their role models?
So I feel like in general for any Sikh, mostly we are inspired by our gurus and Shaheeds from the life that they lived and showed us that this is possible. Guru Gobind Singh Ji, it's not just himself ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵਾਰਿਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਸਰਬੰਸ ਵਾਰਿਆ. So those are the examples. ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਉੱਚੇ set ਹੋਏ ਆ ਕਿ that's up till that point ਕੋਈ ਰਹਿ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ. So but within the family, Khalra Pind is very close to India-Pakistan border right now. Pehla 1947, before 1947, it was within Lahore district. So Jila, the county was Lahore. So this village, the neighboring villages to Khalra are Pauvent, where Baba Deep Singh Ji was born. Narli is the next village to Khalra, which is actually the Jaddi Pind of Shaheed Bhagat Singh. Shaheed Bhagat Singh's Dada or some ancestors moved out of that village and moved to Pakistan areas, some Chak. Par ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੱਦੀ ਪਿੰਡ ਆ, that's Narli, and ਵਾਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ, and then there's Pula ਪਿੰਡ. So ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਸ ਏਰੀਏ ਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ. And I guess ਜਦੋਂ when you have these local when you're growing up and you're like, oh, next pind is Pauvent, where Baba Deep Singh was born. So that kind of gives you some kind of inspiration, and some kind of even kalli inspiration is not necessary. You also get some kind of a responsibility. Ki, oh, I have to live up to that standard. And his own grandfather, Harnan Singh, he was part of the five committee members of Kamagata Maru ship that came to Canada. So he was part of the Gadri struggle from Shanghai. So those kind of inspiration, that my own Dada went to Canada, and in his speech, which you earlier mentioned, was given in Canada, Dixie Gurdwara, he did mention that this country did not allow my grandfather to enter, but at least I am here. And I mean, those kind of all the nearby places, heroes, and Sikh history, that's what inspired him. But I would say it's also my Bapuji. I would say certain ways, the way we also grew up, and we took this whole loss of my father was because of my Bapuji's own struggle. He was also 9 years old when my Pardadaji went to China and never came back. And he went through the similar personal struggles, but he was politically very involved, and even the political understanding of Punjab and Akalis and even the Indian independence that my father got was from his own father. My grandfather worked in a school as a clerk and even a math teacher. So those all things shaped him up to understand the situation, the social activism, the political activism. So there are a lot of factors that inspired Jaswant Singh Khalra. It's not just one person. In his youth, in his college days, he was also a member of Naujwan Bharat Sabha. At that time, even Bhagat Singh inspired him. So at every step, there are different people who inspired him.
That's brilliant. And just starting to close to an end, just a few things. And also, you talked about one of the inspirations being Sikhi. And one thing that resonated really well with me was on their final day, I think there was a shabad that Bhai Sahib would constantly throughout the day just read and do abhyas of. So with our Shaheeds, there's always a commonality that Sikhi was very, very strong and was a massive spark to that happening. And I think that's really important for us to realize that we have all these great aspirations and dreams for the Panth. And as we've mentioned before, if there's no Sikhi driving it or giving water to that plant, then the Kirpa cannot happen. And it's basically from Guru Sahib Kirpa that all of this, us even sitting here today, so us karke udam karna hi penda. Just finishing off, Benji, before we wrap up about just what your organizations are doing and how Sangat can actually get to the book. I'd just like to finish with yourself, Navkiran, Benji. And this is also a personal question from myself, but I'm sure a lot of the Sangat would benefit from hearing this. If Bhai Sahib were here today in a physical form, because the spirit obviously definitely lives on with us, what would you think that Bhai Sahib would want, what kind of a message would they want to portray to the diaspora, to everyone listening, and also the people of Punjab today?
I think his speech, the full speech in Dixie Gurdwara is a 40-minute speech he gave. And I would recommend anyone who wants to think that what Jaswant Singh Khalra would be thinking, or what his perspective about future of Sikhi was or would be, you can get the entire message out of that speech. And even us as a family, we go back to that speech all the time. He has talked about the whole problem of the Western world and how people will be struggling or are struggling for environment rights, about other issues, equality issues. But the answer to everything would be if we all start living with what Guru's mat is, about how Guru has talked about the Begumpura, and that's the principles he would, and few other things that you earlier mentioned, the facts and figures that he actually focused on. He did mention in his speech that don't be someone who just goes and say, oh, about 1 million, about 50,000 people we were killed. Talk with facts. दुनिया दे पढ़े लिखे लोग जेड़े है ओह about ते यकीन नहीं करदे, ओ fact मांगदे है. And then he also said that whenever you have to tell your story, you should follow the legal process also, just to show the world कि ਅਸੀਂ ਆ ਵੀ करके देखिया सीगा. But go to the lok kacheris worldwide. So there are so many issues, even Punjab struggle is not over till now. Like it comes in the form of farmer struggle or other morche that we are going through. But those struggles are not important, but we need to learn how to tell our story, how to tell our narrative to the entire world, wherever we are living. And now Sikhi is not just centered in Punjab, it's all over the globe. And then we need to know how to explain ourselves when we are out there. And Khalsa was formed to be the human rights defender for everyone, and definitely with that we need to defend our own human rights also. So we shouldn't forget our own story when we are trying to help others.
Yeah, I think we'll spend the last 5-10 minutes just taking final messages and information about the organizations. But Gurmeet, Benji, would you like to finish off with anything before we start wrapping up?
So the questions you asked, what inspired him, I would say it's all in the book. So, his heroes at every stage of his life are in the book. The events that inspired him and what was his thinking during each event. So when we talk about the partition, what was he going through when he saw his neighbors not being there anymore and they're on the other side of the border and not being able to talk to them? That's in the book. What he thought about his grandfather is in the book. What he thought about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, what he thought about the wars that he saw, the 1965 and the 1971 Indo-Pak wars. All of that is in the book. So this book is a must read for all children, and I created them in both languages. These books in English and in Punjabi, and page by page, paragraph by paragraph, you have translations. In Punjabi, there is glossary of difficult words at the bottom. In English, there are footnotes as well to the events. So children can understand the languages as well. Over here, our children don't understand Punjabi well. So since this topic is a little bit heavy and it relates with legal language and activism language, having the two books side by side, children are not only going to learn about activism, about history, but they're going to learn languages, both the languages properly. In Punjab, children are going to learn very good English if they have the two books with each other. So I just want to say, read the books, get inspired by them, and make them a study curriculum. Into a study curriculum over a year. Study, parents read the book and study it with your children in families, and teachers take them to the school and make study one chapter a week, and then have come up with discussion points and projects on each chapter. And it's going to be a great book forever for children. It's a great gift for children forever to come back to over and over again and to be inspired from.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's something that I'll be taking for the kids at my local Gurmukh class very, very soon. So just on that note, the book is available in Punjabi and English, and also acts as a learning platform for those of us trying to understand the more tiered Punjabi, which we kind of find difficult at times. So it has another benefit from that aspect. So just to let the Sangat know where they can buy this book from, the first place, if you're based in the UK, which is where I'm speaking from, mightykhalsa.com, which is an organization under Everything's 13. They're selling the book, and it can be shipped out to you anywhere across the UK and abroad, I believe, if necessary. And then obviously Gurmeet Kaur under peoplekaur.org. They can also send you the book, whether it's in Punjabi or English. Benji, I'm correct. Those are the main two retailers for the book at the point.
That's right. If you go to pippal.org, pippal.org, there's a list of worldwide distributors, of which Mighty Khalsa is UK and Europe distributor. And then we have at least 8 or 9 Punjab distributors now. We are trying to get these books in every major bookstore in Punjab right now. We're also raising funds to get this book in every library and school in Punjab. So if you're listening to this and you want to contribute, you can go to the Swant Network, dvnetwork.org, and look for the Valiant Jaswant Singh Khalra project and contribute. And go to people.org and look for all the distribution points. We have distribution point in Australia, UK, USA, Canada. We have huge distribution points in Canada as well. And all that information is on people.org.
That's right. Yeah, someone just asked whether it's a separate book or different books. I just like to clarify, it is the same book, just one's been translated by English, one's been translated in Punjabi. And what we will do on the Basics of Sikhi Facebook is share what both Benjis have just mentioned. First of all, that link to the very, very powerful speech by Bhai Sahib at Dixie Road Gurdwara. We'll be sharing that on our Facebook. We'll share a link to people.org and also to the Swans Network, from which you can also help fund these initiatives. And that's one thing I want to finish off with, is that both Benjis have invested so much time in this. We have the easy job now of actually just buying one and reading it. So as a bunt, I think quite often we expect too much for free, and we don't appreciate effort and people's livelihoods that have gone into this. So the onus is on us now to not only just buy a book, but support it so much that, money is never an option, never a worry for the people doing this seva. And we are a very rich community in that sense. So we should have no problems filling that, so that more of these gifts that you said for the future can be produced. And just one thing I'd like to personally finish with is, we talked about activism, and it's crazy because I do want to say this whilst we're live. I tried to share this actual stream to Facebook earlier, and we were denied because it says that there's inappropriate wording that didn't allow us to do that. So the activism does continue. We saw over the past week people that had up posts relating to Shaheeds all across the diaspora and Punjab. Facebook had deleted those posts from 10, 20 years or 10 years ago. And that oppression still continues today by not being able to share a live stream about a book about a Shaheed. So we've only been able to share this on YouTube, but let that be a warning that what Bhai Sahib's legacy stood for is happening, even right now. And Benji mentioned being serious about these things. And the first page opens up to say this African proverb. And it honestly brought a massive smile to my face, because I use this proverb and it's something very close to my heart. And I use it in literally all of my talks that I'm blessed to do. And the proverb says, it's an African proverb that says that until the lion learns how to write, every story will always glorify the hunter. And it's explaining that unless the lion is able to tell its own story, the hunter will say that I killed it from, I went to battle with it, but really it was a cowardly kill. But until the lion has a pen and paper to hand, no one will ever hear its story. And at that point now, we are those lions. So it's on us to put pen to paper and let people know, let ourselves know, most importantly, what has happened, and let that inform our future decisions. So if there's anything else you'd like to mention, please feel free, either of you.
So I got a message saying there's a typo in the book, and they said it should be until the lioness learns to tell the story, because the lion has been at that point taken away by the hunter.
Okay, perfect.
So it's the lioness is telling the story.
That makes sense as well. Yeah, well, I think we understand the concept from it. But brilliant. So do support. We will share on our Facebook links to where you can buy the books, the link to the speech, and remember that we are still there's still a need for activism today. Today against Facebook for not having us to share this. So bear in mind that there's a lot to do, but also it's a massive blessing for those of us to have these opportunities open up to us, just as Bhai Sahib did. So I'd just like to give a massive thank you from everyone on behalf of whoever's tuned in, and more important, and also the team at Everything's 13, for both of you for joining us, for the seva you've done, for blessing us with this gift that truly is a gift for ourselves and future generations that will continue to inspire with Bhai Sahib's legacy for many, many years to come. So on that note, forgive us for any mistakes that have been made, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Support the project and let us know if you have any questions. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.